The Tories in the UK have no new ideas, and Labour is outperforming them with the old ones. British governments live with the fact that there are always one or two party defections to the opposition, and especially towards the end of an election period when MPs start to worry about their careers. But the departure of the Tory MP for Dover, Natalie Al-Fiqi, is unparalleled. I talked about this week already. For years, she was the loyal wife of Tory MP Charlie Al-Fiqi, but after he was accused of sexual violence 3 times and was ultimately sent to prison for it, Natalie Al-Fiqi was quickly declared his successor in the House of Commons. As MP for Dover and Deal, 2 ports that most refugees head for, Al-Fiqi was more radical than others. She thought deportations to Rwanda were a brilliant idea because foreigners were breaking into Britain, she accused Labour of wanting open borders, and Labour leader Keir Starmer was just Sir Softy to her. She was clearly in favour of Brexit, against clean air regulations and against restrictions on oil and gas drilling. And in short, she was far to the right as the Conservatives could get. And now she's with Labour and will be recommending the Social Democrats in the next election. How is that going to work? Defections usually come from the center of a party. The people concerned explained this by saying that the party has moved too far away from its principles. But Al-Fiqi comes from the extreme right. She would therefore have no chance of being a candidate for Labour. When Keir Starmer set off for Dover, a photogenic handshake with a new candidate, it became clear how the defection came about. Al-Fiqi has given up on Rwanda and is now in favor of the Labour idea of putting an end to the traffickers by means of an anti-people smuggling force and most cooperation with the EU. And this is a blow to the Tories who have made the Rwandan deportation their ideological tenet. For 3 years, Labour has been trying to win back or even win over Tory voters. And they consist of 2 groups. The former working class, socially conservative, economically left, and hard right on migration and crime, and the suburban people who are centrist on everything and judge parties on their performance. The people who devised this Labour strategy could hardly have dreamed that it could win over the far right, and Al-Fiqi's defection must be credited as a mad coup for them. Natalie Al-Fiqi herself may be an exception, but it's now clear that Labour's consistent poll lead is due to support from people who think like Al-Fiqi. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak may claim a hard line for the Tories on crime, migration and the military, but the electorate now favours Labour on these issues. And while Starmer's party is simultaneously advocating for more workers' rights and decarbonised electricity by 2030. But in reality, the governing party is simply crumbling. It appears to have no way of dealing with the emerging populist Reform UK party as well. And new ideas are even less to be found among the Tories. The right-wingers in the party are fighting each other as national and popular conservatives who are vying for union with the populists after the next election defeat. The liberal centre of the Tories can only despair here. As a pure spectacle, British politics remains unsurpassed, and especially the Tories, who can now expect even more departures. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservatives and the opposition Labour Party are increasingly making the economy a battleground in their snap election campaign. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer, or Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt, said on Friday the Conservatives would cut taxes for workers, while Labour's plans would increase household tax bills by £2,000 a year. And on Thursday, Labour leader Keir Starmer accused the Conservatives of crashing the economy, and a spokesman dismissed Hunt's claims about the cost of taxes. It's quite interesting to look at the real numbers, and many of those appear similar now that Starmer has moved Labour to the political centre. But Sunak is indeed expected to call the election later this year, and opinion polls show Labour is on track to win it. And Britain's tax burden is the highest since World War II, after public spending soared during the corona pandemic and the rise in energy prices in 2022. Sunak has sought to draw a clear line with Labour by saying he wants to abolish all national insurance contributions paid by workers in the long term. And Labour believes that plan is unworkable. It has promised not to raise personal income tax or corporation tax. It plans targeted measures by imposing VAT on private school fees and raising the burden on non-resident taxpayers abroad. The reluctance of both parties to raise taxes raises questions about how they can improve public services and repair public finances. Hunt has eyed future cuts to public spending that seem implausible given the strains that many public services already face. Hunt says future productivity gains in the public sector will boost his totals, but that is a challenge previous governments have evaded. Labour promises to improve public services and end underinvestment in infrastructure and other areas vital to faster economic growth. Sunak and Hunt have set new fiscal rules in 22 after Liz Truss' brief time in Downing Street triggered a bond market meltdown, though. The main rule says public debt as a proportion of gross domestic product or GDP must fall by year 5 in official forecasts. The government is only just on track to meet that target, leaving little scope for tax cuts or spending increases. A second rule says public debt should not exceed 3% of GDP also in year 5. And Labour says it will keep the debt target but will apply the borrowing rule to day-to-day spending, allowing it to borrow more to finance investment. However, it has dropped a plan to borrow up to £28 billion a year for green investments. Labour wants to decarbonise the energy system by 2030, 5 years earlier than the Conservatives. It would lift the ban on new onshore wind farms, create a state-owned energy company, and set up a national prosperity fund to invest in green technologies. The Conservatives say the plans will be much more expensive than Labour claims now. Sunak last year delayed a ban on the sale of new petrol cars. He said he remained committed to net zero emissions by 2050. And Sunak has improved relations with the European Union, but Brexit is a drag on the economy, and new controls on food imports from the Union present a new hurdle for businesses since April. Starmer has promised to improve relations from 2025 when the UK-EU partnership agreement is reviewed, but he says he will not return Britain to the single market or a customs union. Before the 2019 election, the Conservatives promised to build 300,000 new homes a year in England by the mid-2020s, but their plans to relax planning rules were watered down to avoid angering voters. And last year, fewer than 250,000 homes were built in England, Wales and Scotland combined. Labour is promising to overhaul the planning system to speed up the buildings of homes and infrastructure. It plans to give local authorities more powers to help projects get completed faster. And the Labour Party, which has its roots in the union movement, wants to ban so-called zero-hour contracts, give new hires better protection against dismissal, and increase sick pay. It says it will repeal laws that have angered unions and encourage more flexible working arrangements. Employers have expressed concern, and Labour has promised to consult them on policy. And the Conservatives say Labour's plans will cost jobs and lead to more strikes. And Starmer is highlighting how volatile British politics has become since Brexit, with 5 Conservative Prime Ministers in Downing Street in 8 years. The upheaval has contributed to low levels of business investment, and the prospect of more stability under a Labour government, especially if it wins the large parliamentary majority that polls predict it will, could help ease investor jitters at least. But you see, there is still some time until the elections, and you never know what will happen until election day. But we at least have found a few differences between the parties, which is still quite hard, with Labour not wanting to commit themselves to too many things at the moment, not to anger away any voters. But if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.